So welcome everyone. I'm Josephine Braun. I'm the webinar coordinator for EDGE, a network for ministry development, and I'll be introducing the webinar for you this afternoon and just running through briefly for those who are new how this technology works, and then introducing our presenter, Lydia, to us today. This webinar is being recorded, so for those who know folks that would really love to have been a part of this today but were unable to do so, the recorded version of the webinar will be available within a week following the webinar, and you can pass that along. There was a $10 or $9.99 fee for this webinar, so if you'd like access to the recording, then there will be a fee for the recording as well. So Lydia is joining us today, and she's prepared a PowerPoint presentation and she has videos, so I know this promises to be a very interactive webinar experience. Just to give you a brief orientation to the screen, you'll notice her PowerPoint presentation at the top left, and that is something that she will be in charge of advancing so that her presentation will coordinate with the slides that she has prepared. You see Lydia and I on video. I hopefully will be keeping my comments to a minimum, and we'll hear more from Lydia than we will from me. But my job is to stop and to field the questions and to moderate some of the discussion if that becomes necessary, and to provide these introductory comments. The way that you can participate in this webinar is by chatting, and you'll note that many of you have already begun to do that at the bottom of the screen. So unfortunately, you won't be able to pose your questions verbally, but you will be able to type your questions and comments in as the webinar is in progress. For those who are new, to do that, just click the little bar at the bottom of the chat pod that you see at the bottom of your screen, type what you need to say, and then either press enter or the little bubble to the right of the bar, and that will ensure that what you've typed is visible for all to see. Lydia and I will stop at points during the presentation, and I know that she welcomes your participation, so feel free to type any questions or comments as you think of them, and we'll deal with them when the time arises. If you do have a concern about technology, you can message me directly and I can try to work with you to resolve that. To do that, if you see the top right of the chat pod again, there's a little menu. If you click that menu with a little icon, or the button rather, the little menu pops up and there's an option to start chat with. You just take your mouse, your cursor up there, and you can start chat with the host, and then that will enable a private chat conversation between you and I, and you can share your concerns with me. That will be visible as a second tab at the bottom left of your chat pod. You see everyone, which is currently the chatting that we're all seeing, but if a private chat is started, you'll see that little button to the right of the everyone, and you can just toggle back and forth between the group conversation and the private conversation. So without further ado, Lydia, I'm going to introduce you as a spirited youth worker, educator, pastor, and worship leader who's had many roles, and all have helped you in your commitment to nurturing worship experiences that are inclusive and engaging to all people, especially those who are often on the margins. Most recently, I know you've taken the position as program coordinator for worship, music, and spirituality for the United Church of Canada, and in that role you currently support the worship life of the United Church and General Council Office, nurturing faithful and transformational worship experiences across the country, fielding worship, music, and spirituality questions from every level of the church, and administrating wonderful resources like Gathering. I was happy to know that, to put a face to the resource that I use on occasion, Worship Matters, and a yearly Lenten devotion. I see you're also starting a doctorate this year at Drew University. I imagine that must be very busy for you. And you have your master's in divinity from Atlantic School of Theology. So we welcome you, and we look forward to this presentation.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm having a little bit of a hard time reading all the comments at the bottom. I don't have my glasses. So Josephine is going to be a great help in fielding some of the questions. So if I don't answer your question right away, please forgive me and wait a few minutes, and hopefully it will come towards the end or at some point during the presentation. I would also like to make sure that during this time, questions or concerns that you have are addressed. I can't promise answers. I don't know all the answers, but we can definitely explore together. I'm wondering, to start with, if people could type in their expectations or their hopes for this workshop, to maybe to help finish the end of this sentence. At the end of the hour, I would like to. And if you could just type in what you would like to get at the end of this hour. I see that some people have already typed in some things, like they want to find ways to try and bring more youth into worship, says Timothy, and enabling all ages and worship experiences, growth in faith and service. These are great. Me as well. So if you could type in some of those things, that would be great. Have resources for intergenerational worship experiences? Yeah. Stepping stone. Yeah. Have a source for resources, planning all ages. Resources. Okay. Great. Thank you for these. And if I don't get to answer or address all of these within our hour together, please feel free to call or to email me throughout the year at any other time, and I'd be so glad to share resources, examples, experiences with you. I think everyone has gotten a chance to share, have we? Yeah. So, new perspectives. Thanks, Andrea. So as people are finishing up, let's start with prayer. Gracious God, help us as people passionate about worship to find new ways of celebrating the whole body of Christ in our worship, especially children and youth. Help us to avoid worship that is for children, because communal worship is for all, not a select few. Help us to avoid worship that is to children, because we are all active participants of the work of the people. Rather, God, help us to strive for worship that is with children, a type of worship where all, regardless of age, have a space to be active participants. Amen. Intergenerational worship. Now, this is a loaded term, as we all know, and it means so many different things to so many different people. But I can tell from the comments in the room already that for all of us, intergenerational worship is important, and it is the whole body of the church. I particularly get excited about intergenerational worship because it's one of the only times in our society now where people of all different ages can get together and be together. And that's so important for all of our developments and all of our growths. And we need to create spaces where people can be and interact intergenerationally. For the sake of this workshop, I want to give you my definition of intergenerational worship. And my definition is an intercultural worship space where each generation brings and shares their own cultural learnings to the corporal, to the group experience. And I do believe that every generation and every group is a culture into itself. So intergenerational worship is really a form of intercultural worship that we can take with us. I'm going to move on, but if you have questions or comments about that, please feel free to type. So this is what I'm hoping to do in the next hour, and then these are the slides I have prepared, and we can veer our conversation away when we need to. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about why intergenerational worship matters, but I have a feeling that everyone here believes that intergenerational worship matters. Then I want to talk a little bit about kinder, which is kind of the kindergarten, preschool age, schoolhouse rock, a little bit about school age children, and then a little bit about adolescence. Now, all of these age groups that I'm grouping are huge, and the reason why they're so huge is simply because we're working within an hour. but there definitely is more specific information that we can get. I want to, after talking broadly about different age groups of children and youth, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we gather at the table all together, some suggestions that I use, some tools that I find helpful, and then a space for questions, concerns, things that didn't come up, and then a closing benediction. I hope that seems okay. Do people feel okay with that agenda? Great. Thanks, Laura. Thanks. Thanks, Andrea and Allison. Good. Okay, let's move on then. So I have a couple disclaimers. My first disclaimer is that not all kids want to be in church. So when we do worship for children and we invite them to be a part of the service, there can't be an assumption that they want to be there. Truthfully, some kids don't want to be in church from as soon as age 9, but they don't have a choice until later on. My second disclaimer is that it is particularly challenging to dig or get another generation. Think of the Who, My Generation. It's almost impossible to talk about a group without making broad generalizations and brushstrokes, leaving out socioeconomics, leaving out a whole bunch of other things that exclude people. So even though we're talking in broads, I realize how faulty that is, and know that even though we are dealing with broad strokes and it is inevitable, and oftentimes when you're talking about age groups or demographics, like in my generation, it's easy to put down or compare one generation to another. I don't necessarily find that helpful. What I do find helpful, though, is having a starting place to start conversations. And sometimes there are often very shared similarities that people go through in different stages of their life that can be a helpful starting ground, knowing that nobody is exactly the same and every culture is different. So, for instance, if we lump every 20 something in the world into Generation Y, we're missing a lot of individuality. But there are some things that are true about technology that can help us with a group of that generation, realizing that we're not getting the full spectrum. I hope that makes sense, what I just said. And also, all that being said, when we're dealing with children and growth, there are certain physical and developmental characteristics that are helpful for us to be aware of. Of course, every child is different, every person is different, everybody's abilities are different, so it doesn't always work out that way. But there is some helpful understandings about someone's developmental stage that makes it easier for us to plan or program. The third disclaimer I want to make right up from the beginning, actually I should say four, but the third is that faith is a total gift from God. It's not something that we can insert or inject into people, and because it's a total gift, it's a bit of a mystery. So although we can generally determine the order of someone's faith, that someone might have, they might start off with conceived notions or ideas about God and then go into a story phase and then go into a questioning phase. Although we know the order that people go through in faith development, nobody really knows when. That's all a big guessing game. It's just that it tends to happen this way for a certain amount of people, but that's not always the case for everybody. So all of these things are disclaimers. And my last disclaimer is that I am by no means an expert. I just love worship. I love children. I love intergenerational worship. And I have a passion for putting the two together. Those are my disclaimers. I think I'm ready to move on. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this part I'm going to go through quickly because we're all on the same page, I think, that vital worship by nature is intergenerational. Vital, life-giving worship by nature has a wide variety of people coming to the table together. Worship is a place where God's story is told in accessible and meaningful ways. And when I say accessible, I mean accessible to a wide range of people. If I'm doing something that is not accessible to someone, it means that they can't reach it. It's easy, I think, to think of accessibility in terms of physical development and growth. Like, for instance, I would never put a 2-year-old on a two-wheeler because their balance isn't there yet. But I might expect a 2-year-old to understand something that I'm saying in a prayer, which really is not at a level that's respectful to them yet. So when I mean accessible, I mean accessible to the person. There are moments of healing, challenge, and transformation for everyone involved. Ideally, it would be nice if that happened all the time. It doesn't always happen all the time, but we hope that there are moments of healing, challenge, and transformation for different people in the congregation at different times. The planning, gifts, and preparation of the people is revealed. Not just myself, the minister, and someone else, but hopefully the gifts and the preparation of all the people, the Sunday school, the ushers, everyone that comes together to put worship together knows and feels that they're a part of the whole. People offer their gratitude and awe, and they have a space to do that. People are welcomed, honored, and cared for, and that means people of all ages. Of course, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes I think of going into a congregation with a little child and, they're shh really sternly or given a really nasty look, and really they're just being themselves. And it's boring for them, and you can't blame them. So how do we welcome and honor and care for everyone in the church? People are active in singing, praying, responding. They're acting in a way that says worship matters. That's tricky, that people in that congregation are acting in ways that say, this is important to me. They're free to observe when they need to, and to watch and to listen. I find that particularly important for children. Really, my point is that all God's children have a place in worship. We all have a place in worship. And we, meaning everybody, of all different ages and stages. So I think that you're all with me. So let's go to Kinder Surprises. So when I say Kinder Surprises, I mean 3 to 5-year-olds. So think of kids that you know who are in kindergarten, or maybe in preschool. These children tend to have very vivid imaginations. They respond well to fixed routines and patterns. In fact, they strive in fixed routines and patterns. They have an expanding vocabulary, and they love to talk and to try it out. Appropriate activities and needs for this age group are simple physical activities that change. For a child who is 3 to 5, to sit for 40 minutes in a row is not an appropriate activity for them. They do need to be moving. Use of all the senses available to them. So you think of those tactile things. Think of a kindergarten classroom, how when you walk in there, there's things to touch that are felty and there's like those little leathery things, but something that allows them to use as many senses as they have available to them. Music and rhythmical instruments are huge in this age group. It seems that children innately have a sense of rhythm in them. Words and phrases that are repetitive and easy to learn are particularly important. Now, when worshiping in this community, we need to remember that faith is often based on impressions, usually picked up from their primary caregiver or their parents. So if their parents are active in the church, their faith will reflect on the child. Rituals and repetition is extremely important and meaningful. Things that happen every week in a similar way so that they can understand it and that they know that they can be a part of it is really important. So for instance, the lighting of the Christ candle, the call to worship. There are things that happen in our services ritualistically that are important for children in this age group because they can recognize it and put themselves into it. The question I have for you in this section is, what impressions do you think a child would gather from weekly worship in your context? The reason I ask this is because at this age group, children get an understanding of worship and faith by the impressions they get from other people. So if I am a young child and I'm in worship, I'm just imagining it, and I see people around me kind of, I don't know, texting to their friends or fiddling in their purses, I might get the impression that they're bored or this isn't an exciting place. Or if I see people who are kind of talking about each other or they seem hostile, I might get the impression that this is not a happy place or this is a place where people are angry. So it would be important, I think, for yourselves to think about pretend being a 3 to 5 year old and imagine going to church and what impression would you think you would get and how might you think of that in terms of your faith? I'm not going to ask you to answer that right now, but think about it. Nice. A place where all are welcome. People sing, eat, play together. That's wonderful. Remember when I first went, I didn't go to church often when I was a child, but when I first went to church, my impressions were that it was a place you went to be bored. I I'm wondering what has worked for you. I want to show you a video of one form of worship with children in this age group that I find works particularly well. And part of the reasons why it works well is because it uses familiar songs, repetitive choruses in in the place during a ritual that children know really well. And it has repeats in the prayers which make it helpful. So I'm gonna ask Josephine if we can play a little bit of this nursery rhyme mass, and this is taken from an Anglican tradition. And in this mass, the whole mass is set to nursery rhymes. Some of it I find a little bit silly, but some of it I find very meaningful. And it's wonderful when you see this happen in a place where children are worshiping, how engaged and active they are. And because it's in the same format of a mass, it's easy for us all to feel engaged and welcomed in it. The clip I have here is about 2 minutes. I'm only going to play about a minute of it just so you can get a feel of it. And this is the prayer of great thanksgiving in this nursery rhyme mass.
Here right now, His Spirit with us. Lift up your hearts to Him, we lift them up. It's the right thing to do, yes, Jesus. Oh, yes, we come in prayer. I'll sing the white bits, you sing the yellow bits. It is right, O Lord, that we come to worship you, give thanks and praise. We gather here, hearts and minds, knowing that you're here with us. Holy, holy Lord, oh holy God, our prayers are joined by the saints. Blessed is the one who comes in peace. Blessed is the Prince of Peace. Send your Spirit, Lord, on these gifts, so they may be to us Christ's flesh and blood. As we share in them, may He be with us and save us by these heavenly gifts. On that night He was betrayed, He took the bread and gave God thanks. Take this and eat of my flesh, it will be.
So I'm going to pause it there, but as you can see, the the liturgy is very similar. Like you can recognize the epiclesis in there, you see the prayer of great thanksgiving, you see the memorial, and then there's even the what's it called? The thing of the affirmation of faith, the Christ has died, Christ has risen. All of it is in there, but in a way that is very accessible and easy to remember. I've seen this done in places where there have been 4 and 5-year-olds who just haven't memorized and who are singing along, but who are singing along in the tone, like with the feeling of it. And it's a wonderful thing. I wish that all of us, when we're doing communion liturgies, could all kind of be involved in the same level of reverence. I'm wondering if there are things that have worked really well for you in your context working with children in this age group. And perhaps you can share a little bit why. If people are typing, I'm just going to read through some of the points I've missed.
Now, while people are thinking of what's worked, I know one thing that has been tried in a context I've served in is just having instruments, rhythm instruments that kids can bang along around to, or even having a mat at the front of the worship space where they can sort of dance or engage freely and in their own way.
Definitely. And I love the idea of the mat in front simply because it allows the children to see what's happening in the worship as well. Sometimes if you put the mat in the back, it's easier for the child to disengage with what's happening in the worship service because they can't see over the people. And I love the idea of the rhythm instruments. Yeah, definitely using simple repetitive songs are great. And even if you can keep one, and I really like that, Andrea, of keeping the same hymn for a whole season, even if it's a chorus, but something that people can use. And the tactile resources are great. Yeah, wonderful. So I know that there's probably more ideas, but I'd like to move on. And I think that a lot of these notes would be available to people, right, Josephine? Yeah, if they want to go back. So if we, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to unmute my microphone there. It takes a second to catch up. But one person did ask earlier whether these PowerPoint slides would be available, so I just needed to get that permission from you, and we can certainly make them available.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to have the slides available and even some more resources. And there are some great suggestions coming in these in the comments as well, so I'd love if we can incorporate those to give out to people as well. So the next...
Great. Well, for the slides, I'll just suggest that if you'd like a copy of them, folks can email you, Lydia. Does that work for you? Okay. And I did put the address at the top of this chatting somewhere. I can type that in.
Sure, and it's in my last slide also. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there are some really good. I like cuddly toys and Play-Doh are great, and even little stress balls are wonderful. So I need to move on just in the sake of time. But Schoolhouse Rock. So now we're talking about school-age children. Once again, this is a huge age bracket, and I apologize because these groups of children are very different. But I'm talking about kids from children from grade 1 up until grade 7. So we're really like 6 to 12 here, which is a huge age bracket. So school-age children, 6 to 8. So this is like grades 1 to grade 3. They're curious and very energetic. They often overestimate their own abilities and what they're able to do, physical and emotional. Enjoy playing pretend games and role plays and are very, very good at it. And seek chances to act on their own in safe ways, supportive ways. For ages 9 to 11, this is a real steady growth spurt. And they understand more concepts, especially concepts like money. And they're starting to form their own opinions of the world and starting to form their own opinions of faith outside of that of their parents. There's a strong desire to belong and to be liked. Oftentimes, this age group is known as the clique group. Like this is where babysitter club and all those sorts of little groups start forming together. And they prefer to be active participants rather than helpers. And I find that children really know the difference. We know the difference if someone is just using us to do something because they want us to, they want us to look like we're a part of it. That we know when we're being tokenized. And children know that as well. So they really prefer to be active participants and know the feeling differently. So worshiping with this group, Faith is often based on the faith of others, but this is expanding to more than just the faith of their family. So this is why I think intergenerational worship is so critical and so important. As we know, many people have different faith and different faith journeys. So if you can see the faith of others, it really can help them in deciding on their own faith. Learning about faith in an intergenerational community is so important to faith development. I just said that, but obviously I think it's important because I'm saying it again. And stories are a powerful way to help children understand the complexity of faith. And what I mean by that, that faith is more than a series of moral codes and moral lessons. That our faith is so complex and so intricate. It's the same reason why Jesus taught in parables, isn't it? That idea that that the hoping for the unseen and understanding this mystery that we surround ourselves in is more than learning the difference between right and wrong and how to be a good person. Being a good person is part of being a good Christian, but it's not what it means to be a good Christian. If that's even a thing, I don't even like the term good Christian. I should say being Christian. Is that okay? So, what has worked for us? One thing that I always find work is stories. Do you mind if we put up the next video, the one with the Legos? Like we said, stories unlock imagination. And if we think about all of the popular books for children at this age, these are the books of wild fantasies. These are the books of talking cats and Harry Potters and wonderful mystical magical worlds, huge imagination, stories transport and give off so much more than we often think. And the story it speaks for itself. You notice at the end of Harry Potter, we don't get at the end of every chapter, this means that Voldemort is bad. We don't need to be told that, but the story speaks so much more. And if we can narrow it down into a moral code, it kind of takes away from the mystery and wonder of it. So for worship for children in this age group, I find what I have found extremely effective is sharing and creating stories with the children. This one clip is taken from it's a vacation Bible camp really, but part of their Bible camp was the kids and the youth and the children retold the stories using their own Lego pieces. There's so many ways of creating stories, but sharing stories or Bible lessons this way I find so effective. So I'm just going to play you a clip of it.
Jesus and his homies were chilling out, maxing and relaxing all cool at the beach.
What a beautiful day.
Jesus said to the gang.
I feel like getting in a boat with my followers.
So they took some money and plenty of honey all wrapped in a £5 note and started sailing the lake. Jesus decided to catch some Z's, while the rest of the gang decided to soak up some rays in the sun's beastly blaze. Suddenly the boat got caught up in some mental surf.
Yo, Jesus, wake up, bro. There's a crazy storm brewing up. We're gonna drown.
Jesus goes,
Peace, brother, oh ye little faith.
he raised one arm and all the clouds disappeared. The disciples were amazed.
This little one was made in an afternoon. There's so many ways of making and retelling the story, even using the Bible reading and just having it acted out. There's so many creative ways of doing that. I do find it helpful for all ages and particularly helpful for children in this age group in creating intergenerational services. Other things that tend to be helpful are choruses and songs. rituals that they can take part in and that are important to everybody. So rituals that everyone takes part in, like for instance, lighting the Christ candle. Children do it, adults do it, everyone takes part in it. Memory versus role plays and dramas. All these things are very effective for this age group. I'm wondering if there are other ideas that people have of what has worked for them with school-age children and why, like why they think that's worked.
Lydia, you really prompted my thinking. I imagine there are lots of ways in the course of a worship service to involve children in the rituals and the things that go on. You mentioned the Christ candle, but one thing that we did this past Sunday, it was Worldwide Communion Sunday, and the minister of the church where I'm serving invited the children to participate in communion by serving. We served at intinction, so by standing at the front and holding the cup. Or the bread I think they were holding, but they felt so honored to be in that place of responsibility, and I think that was really important involvement.
Definitely, and I love it when the involvement, like it's good when it's something special, but it's also good when it's something that everyone is involved in at some point. Like, you know, many people in the church serve communion, so it's a natural thing that the children should serve communion too. Or for instance, being ushers and greeting, taking up collection. These are things that anyone that people in the congregation do as a way to express their faith, and why not children as well? Yeah, I agree. I'm just reading some of these things here. Yep, I love doing pageants and plays with both children and adults. It's great when people can work together, and I see that Jane has done that in her congregation. Sing an upbeat song with a bucket offering and pass the bucket around. Great, love it. So these are things where the children are participating and not just helping. See, and I think that all these examples kind of show that difference. It's a subtle difference, but I think it's a big one. So if we're okay to move on, the next age group is the wonder years, and this is a huge age group. So now we're talking about a huge gap. We're talking about adolescence into young adulthood. Now I have a couple disclaimers with this group as well. We want to be really careful about how we label people. Like obviously there's problems in labels to begin with inherently, but sometimes we need labels to identify things, and sometimes labels can be hurtful and unhelpful. Particularly, I find it difficult and not helpful to name people who look after the youth as youth. So, for instance, if I'm a young adult and I'm leading the youth group and I'm referred to as a youth, that young adult might feel diminished in that setting. So we want to be careful about how we use our terminology. Now, I lovingly refer to my youths as my youths, but it is a name that we need to claim together. And it can have some derogatory stances sometimes within our church. So I just think we need to be careful and look out for that. So in school-age children, I should really change that to high school children. 12 to 13, we're really talking about the intermediates. This is a tough age. I'm sure many of you remember this is a tough age. Or if you have children in this age, it's a tough age. So in this age group, there's uneven, rapid growth, aka it's awkward. It's just awkward. Memory and interest span is expanding. So it's expanding in ways that, you know, I can focus on a video game for like 3 hours, but I can also retain a lot more information. I can remember a lot more quickly. And they're constantly testing their intellectual limits. They're constantly trying to see how much they can understand of different people's conversations. And there's a strong desire for group acceptance. This is huge. There's a desire to fit in. So things that that don't seem cool or really ostracize aren't down. So in the mid to late adolescence, so now we're talking about high school, really. There's a marked difference in development between male and female youth at this age. Like the age where they stop growing, how fast they're growing, there's just differences. And obviously sometimes these differences are pronounced in youth group or in the church, especially for people who are transitioning or who have different gender identities. It's difficult at this age group. There's struggles with identities. Teenagers think about themselves a lot, and that's okay. They're supposed to. This is a time when you figure out who you are and you struggle with it. So at times, often in books and developmental stages, you'll see teenagers being pigeonholed as narcissistic in a sense, but really it's just a time of extreme self-identity and self-thinking to define themselves. So there's a huge desire for independence, which is almost the exact opposite of this huge need to be a part of a group. Like I need to feel independent, but I need to be a part of this group, but I need to be a part of this group because I want to be a part of this group. So there's this need to self-identify independence. It's tricky. And there's a trying to differentiate themselves from their parents. Now we see this all the time in church, right? When children leave church or join a new religion or try out something else because they want a faith that they want to differentiate themselves from their parents. This is when confirmation can be so affirming because it allows the youth to claim a faith for themselves that was given to them or presented to them by their parents and the congregation beforehand. So worshiping with this community, seeking ways to claim a faith of their own is really important. If you can help people, give them language even to help own their own faith, that would be really crucial. And what I mean by giving them language is by talking about your faith. So it's not a tradition that we often do, but testifying, giving testimonies about how your faith has impacted you can help people get the language to claim faith for themselves as well. Abstract thinking and empathy skills are further developed. So at this age group, I'm thinking about myself a lot, but I do have strong empathy skills and I can do more abstract thinking, making connections, deeper connections about biblical stories and how they fit into the larger Christian narrative. Strong emotions. Emotions are huge at this age, so I really advise against playing with people's emotions or manipulating it. Like it's really easy to be overly dramatic or overly sad, and it's easy for a teenager to fall into it because they have strong, intense emotions. So I want to get into what has worked and what has worked for you. And I'm just noticing Laura's comments that, at 43, she's still referred to as a youth. And yeah, I don't think that's okay either. So important not to exclude males. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right, Alice, that because there's such a huge because there is such a difference in development, it's so easy for the males to feel more isolated or vulnerable. So thank you for mentioning that. I find what many things work with worship with teenagers. Hands-on activities, reflection stones, like lots of tactile things tend to work. Stations, so opportunities for people to go off and explore or experience something for themselves. They don't necessarily need to report back, but things where they can think about something in their own context and helping them apply it to what they're going through, what's happening in their daily lives. Working through questions and wonderings, I find really, really important. The things that are almost always useful is media and pop culture, because in adolescence life, pop culture is one of the ways you use to define yourself. In pop culture, we find songs and stories and narratives that say things that we can't necessarily articulate. For instance, if we think back to when you were 13 or 14, there are some songs I bet you remember and you remember all the words to. That song just spoke to you. And I bet you'll remember it for a long time coming. That there's something about certain things of popular culture that speak to certain pockets of generations. And it's important to realize that because it connects us to our daily living and it speaks to us. So one thing, if you could pull up that next video, Josephine, that has worked for many, now this is a few years old, is the idea of incorporating popular music into worship. Popular music in worship is a huge webinar, and we could have a whole other webinar about that, and it's a particular passion of mine, so we could talk about this for a long time. But I just want to show you a little clip of a youth Eucharist, and this is a news clip that came on, I think it was Dateline, but about 2006, 2007, the youth Eucharist came out as a concept, as an idea, and the Bono and the Edge fully supported it and gave up the rights to a bunch of their songs so that people could use the songs in a communion liturgy and that the money would go towards ending poverty. So I'll play you a clip of it, but the message of it is how connecting things that we hear in our everyday life that connects to us and connecting that to the biblical story and how meaningful and important that can be.
When we come back after this break, why are churches setting their
And while we're watching this, I'm just going to read through some of your clips, your comments.
Nightline continues from Washington with Terry Moran.
And now to what happens when U2 meets the Eucharist. For 2,000 years, Christians have set their worship to all manner of music. There was plain song, Gregorian chants, Mozart, Bach, and now Bono. Yes, the boys from Ireland are now taking their place in the liturgy. And worshipers are packing the pews. From New York's Westchester County, ABC's Nancy Cordes has a sign of the times.
Blessed be God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Blessed be God's kingdom, now and forever. Amen.
I am delighted to welcome you tonight. Delighted you have come to sing along with Bono and the boys.
Right from the opening hymn, it is clear this is not your typical church service. It's part rock concert, part karaoke. All worship. They call it a U2 Eucharist, or U2charist for short. The Christian rite of communion, performed this night to the thrum of a fan favorite called Bad.
The body of Christ, the bread of heaven.
Sorry, I hate to cut this off so soon. Do you mind if we stop it, Josephine? I have no idea what the minister meant by professional Christian, I think. But any which way, it's an interesting news clipping. I just realized that I only have 10 minutes left, so I don't want to take too much longer with it. But it does speak to connectivity and how music connects us on different levels. And oftentimes in church, when we think of contemporary music, we think of guitars. And guitars were contemporary music in the 60s and 70s. And really now, when we think of contemporary music, we need to be thinking of the sound of the music, which speaks to people oftentimes a lot more than the words. The words speak, but in tandem with the actual timbre and melody of the music. So we want to be thinking of, well, drum kits. Not to throw away the organ, but there are other sounds that we need to think of if we're thinking of how to speak with people. I really liked Laura's comment. Well, I liked all the comments I saw there. That idea of Jane and the meaning bag is really, really really wonderful and speaks to that personal experience and testimony. And in Laura, that desire to create a service for themselves is really important as well. And I bet you that you're right that they don't like this term intergenerational as much because the idea of their ideas being squashed. So thank you both for those comments. Just to, and for the sake of time, to move on, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we gather all this together. So understanding and knowing that we're dealing with so many different age groups and so many different needs. Every worship service deals with a whole bunch of different needs and a whole bunch of different people together. And obviously there's a lot of wisdom here, so hopefully something will spark. But I'd just like to talk a little bit about how I like to put intergenerational worship services together. And I use the term loosely, intergenerational. But first, I like to think of the 3 P's: pray, plan, and prepare. In praying, I'm listening and discerning, hopefully in a group, to what the Spirit has to say in our community, what the Word is saying to us this week, what's the message, like what does the Spirit have to say to the church? Often a key message or theme would emerge, and then we would go into planning. If possible, it's not always possible in congregational settings, but if possible, to plan how to share this message or even parts of this message in a group, because creative thoughts always come better with more people around, in my experience, simply because it expands our own understandings and our own ideas to up to the ideas of others. So if possible, can you plan this with some people in your youth group, with your Sunday school, or with a few other people in the congregation, an element of the service? Maybe your message is around stewardship and the need to share our time and our talents. Is there a group, the stewardship committee, can they work and think of a way of sharing that message? Or can you talk about that with the Sunday school over a Sunday? And then the next stage for me is always the preparing. Now, this preparing takes a long time. You prepare yourself to experience the holy in something different, and you prepare yourself for some backlash, because when you try something new, it doesn't always work. Sometimes it goes a little hot messy, and sometimes it works out well. So you prepare yourself and others for, we're trying something new here. We want to see where the Spirit is leading, and prepare people to think of where did they experience the holy in that. Not always easy. The other part of preparing is you want to plan it out and practice it. Practice it with the children, practice it with whoever you're doing it with. If this helps to make sure that people feel like they're active participants, and also helps make sure that no one's being put on stage. So, sometimes you do an intergenerational service and it's kind of cutesy when the kids mess up because, it's cute. And sometimes it is cute, but if you can prepare, and people mess up, I mess up all the time during worship, but we want to try and do our best in presenting our best. So prepare and practice with the children so that they're proud of what their offering, and make it as such. Prepare yourself, prepare your congregation. And then try and polish and practice within that preparing. Look at me, I'm all alliterated in that slide. And I'm rushing because I'm close to the end here. So I just want to talk a little bit about pulling it all together and gathering at the table. So in this, I suggest to tag and target specific audiences. Now, I'm not saying that you don't do intergenerational services and things are only accessible to 3-year-olds and not to the rest of the congregation. Obviously, I find the nursery rhyme communion very moving myself, but we can't be all things to all people, and we need to respect people's developmental and physical developmental differences. And it's more respectful I find, to make things age appropriate than to water something down. So you want to tag and target specific audiences for specific parts of your services. It doesn't necessarily need to be the whole service, but if you can think of specific parts where you might say, well, this will be really accessible to the young kids in our service, or to the kids that you have in your service, could be another thing. The next thing, you want to adapt and accommodate to things that you are already doing. So routine, as we know, is important for many children. And if possible, are there parts of your service that you can adapt or modify or accommodate to make them more more accessible and approachable to younger people in your congregation without totally rocking the boat and causing a ruckus? So that might mean, can you change your offering once a week? Can you change your call to worship? Can you change your prayers of the people to a different format that might be more accessible to a different age group? The next thing I have is to be bold and beautiful. Go big, why not? And beautiful isn't necessarily the aesthetic of pretty, but beautiful is the aesthetic of evocative. Beautiful things evoke something. They evoke the imagination, they evoke thought, they challenge. It's not necessarily about being beautiful, it's about being evocative. Listen and learn from the people in the congregation to the people that you're trying to reach. I remember once I was planning an intergenerational service with one of my confirmation classes, and we were planning the service, and the one part that they did not want to take out was the sermon, because they loved the sermon and they wanted to hear it and they wanted to be challenged. And so it's really important, I think, to listen and to learn from the people on the margins in your congregation and from the people that you want to try and reach. Engage. Lastly, engage and educate and evaluate. When I say engage as many people as possible in the process so that people feel a part of it, that they're part of the service. Educate. If you can educate the children on what they're going to be participating in, make sure they're educated on the scripture story, that they know it really well before taking part of it in service. That can be really helpful. And then if you can evaluate together, and when I say evaluate, I don't mean nitpick or criticize, but to draw out the value and draw out the wonderfulness of what happened in that amazing intergenerational service and celebrate what was great about that, where people felt the Spirit moving, and how we might be able to do that more in the future. I just whipped through that really quickly. I am so sorry, but I just realized I'm out of time. So I have a couple minutes here for questions. Well, literally, I have 2 minutes for questions. So if people have questions.
Well, we don't have any questions at the moment, so if you think of some, please feel free to type them in. But yes, certainly people can email you questions. Is that right, Lydia? Oh, okay.
Oh, most definitely. I would love it.
And perhaps just in the last couple of minutes here, as you're thinking of any final questions and comments that you have, somebody asked earlier about these notes. I believe the chat notes was what they were referring to. And I believe you can just copy and paste that. So if you want to try that out, I know that I can do that, so I'm assuming that you have that option as well. If you scroll to the top of your chat pod, just highlight the text, copy and paste, and maybe save the comments in a Word document. That might be helpful for those who want the ideas that have been shared here. I know there have been some very good ones, so give that a try, and if you have any trouble with that, let me know, and maybe we can make something available for you.
Great. So some people have been asking about resources, and there are some great ones out there. The one that the most recent one I know of, this one just came out last year, and it's called Sacramental Worship with Children. Now, what I like about this book, it's Anglican, so it's based around the Eucharist, but what I like about it is that it has a lot of books have ideas or philosophies around children and worship. This one does as well, but it has a lot of straight out liturgies that you can adapt and change for yourself. It also has some information on how to do your own stop animation and how to create your own animation if you want to do storytelling that way. What I have up here is avant-garde worship ideas. Like Proust has a lot of neat liturgies. PowerPoints for worship. Oftentimes people ask me for slides for that. Ministry Matters has a bin for youth and children that has some ideas in it. But there's tons of great resources out there, and I see that some people are starting to share. And I would be glad to share any resources that I come across with you, or if you have questions to email me. Maybe what I could do at a later date is prepare a sheet or a list of some resources and send that out to people who are interested. And Laura has just offered some of her services as well, which is great.
So I'll just suggest, if you feel comfortable leaving your email address here, and this is a secure site, so there's no problem with that, but understand issues around confidentiality and sharing of email. But if you do feel comfortable, to just type that in here, and maybe you can be in touch that way. Otherwise, I know Lydia has offered her email, and if there's someone in particular you would like to be in touch with that's been on the webinar today, you can email edge@ucc.com, and perhaps we can link you up that way.
Yeah, I miss seeds and sowers too. So thank you all. This has been wonderful. I'm sorry that I didn't get to meet you in person, but if you're doing something fun and exciting in your church, please let me know about it. I'd love to hear about fun and exciting things that are going on. Or if you if you want to do something fun in your church and you were hoping for some more ideas or resources or someone to brainstorm with, I'd be glad to do that as well. And my email is right there, so please feel free to be in contact with me.
Well, thank you very much for this, Lydia, and no doubt there are quite a variety of resources available, and you've certainly got me thinking, and I know some others as well, as different things we might try. So we thank you for helping us to look at this important topic, and particularly how the worship that we do is not something we do to or for children, like you said at the beginning, but something that we do with children, and to think of them as part of our community and our youth as well, and to find ways, as we do any group that is part of our congregation, to involve and include them in meaningful ways in our worship.
Oh, definitely. We're all a part together. And I was going to do a hashtag prayer with us, but we're out of time. But there is a hashtag prayer, like a Twitter prayer, in that book that I was telling you about. But I would just suggest the blessing. May we leave from this virtual space grounded in God's love. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
The book is over.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating. The recording for this webinar will be available sometime within the next week, and that will give you access again to this chat pod and I believe the PowerPoint as well. So when you log back into the site, that will all be as you left it. So thank you very much. We hope to see
Thanks, everybody.